What's up? So, I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I am currently in the process of reaching out to all the people that I know, all the people that I've known. I'm relaunching my social media. It's a very poignant time to have these very pertinent conversations. And it just seems like there's been a calling for me to get back on camera every single time I've gone out as of lately, just for simple things like going grocery shopping. I've had people wanting to photograph me, wanting to interview me right here locally in Washington, D.C. I've had the opportunity just randomly going grocery shopping within a few blocks. I'll have a photographer just be like, I want to take your picture, or some people who are, doing different projects want me to be on camera. So right now is a better time, no better time than ever for me to use my intellect for my own personal endeavors. So I want to welcome you all, and hopefully you will find this conversation insightful. And I've kind of stayed away from the topic of Black Lives Matter. However, it's something that I was asked about yesterday. Again, I went just grabbing some water, grocery shopping, and I had a couple of students, communication majors, and I majored in communications. I minored in Black studies. So as soon as I heard, hey, I'm a mass communication major, I'm like, yeah, I gotta do an interview for these kids. So they wanted to know about Black Lives Matter, how I felt about Black Lives Matter, and basically the relationship between Black Lives Matter and the economy, and if I felt like there was a relationship. And my candid answer was that, and guys, this is my opinion. I will do videos that are more like factually based off of research, but this is strictly my opinion. So the way that I see this whole thing unfolding, I know that there have been many lives. I remember the very first time that I heard about it was when I was a kid. It was Rodney King. I don't know if you guys remember Rodney King, but he got the shit beaten out of him. I want to say it happened in Cali. And it was like the first time as a child that I heard about like this whole police brutality against Black lives. But these things have been going on for ages, and there have been many Black men who have lost their lives. And the reason that it's become more discussed as of lately is because we are now in the digital era. So people have their camera phones, so things can be continuously logged, which is a great thing because we don't have to rely on traditional media sources to tell us the news. We have passerbyers and civilians with their camera phones saying, hey, this is happening right now in real time. And this is the reason why on a mass scale we have such access to what is going on right now. However, I say this has been going on for a very long time. So why is the rebellion on this scale? Black Lives Matter is a movement that happened, was founded. Let's find out the exact date. I know I've heard Black Lives Matter for a while. I know it's been at least a good 7 years, at least. Okay, exactly. July 13th, 2013. So July 13th, this week, will make it the 7th year anniversary of Black Lives Matter. It was founded 7 years ago. So it's been around for 7 years. In these 7 years, there have been a number of deaths. Why is it on this scale at this point, right? Because we have to put our thinking caps on and say, does America just all of a sudden care? Like, for centuries, we've had slavery where white people didn't think it was a problem to just use us for free labor and just rape us and just, there was no conscience with that. Like, for the most part, white people didn't really think it was a problem. And then we had redlining, and then we had all of these civil rights issues, and we had in the 60s them unleashing their dogs at us, and people that can speak right now and talk about segregation and talk about the water fountains like they're living right now, and they can talk about the fact that They got hand-me-downs for books at their school, and they had to drink out of separate water fountains and use separate bathrooms, and they're living and breathing right now. So why now? Why at this time has America just, decided that, hey, this is wrong? And that's my question. As a critical thinker, I'm like, why right now? And the statement Black Lives Matter, I mean, it's a very plain and simple statement. Yes, of course. Black Lives Matter. That's a fact. I guess it's a reminder, to treat Black people fairly, to treat Black people equally. But to me, and I'm not trying to trash the movement, I'm just saying that words are words, right? And some people are more gifted with words than others. So like Martin Luther King was very gifted with his words, which caused movements, it caused action. But what are the demands of Black Lives Matter? The way that I see white supremacy and the infrastructure being able to exist, to me, it's not that much bigger than socioeconomics. To me, that's the root and the bulk of the issue. If Black people had just as much money as white people, pretty much all of these issues would go away. Almost every single issue will go away. And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about assets. I'm talking about things that you can generationally pass down to your children. I believe that almost all of these problems would go away. Especially if this was something that happened formerly, if we were allowed to have just as much money formerly, and there wasn't redlining, which banned Black people from moving into certain neighborhoods, and there weren't all of these rules and all of these laws that prevented Black people from reading and writing and getting books. There were laws in place to prevent Black people from being educated. And so if we could rewind time and these things didn't happen and Black people had just as much money as white people, there would be none of these social structures. So to me, Black Lives Matter really needs to address the elephant in the room. The tangibles, the reparations that were not given to us. And the fact that America used our free labor to build this country, not for a year or two, for centuries, almost 500 years. And our ancestors didn't get anything for that. And why the Japanese people got reparations, for the treatment for their internment camps, and why the Jewish community got reparations in the trillions with a T, not the trillions, I'm sorry, the billions with a B. So why is it that Black people have never gotten reparations? I worked at a casino in Southern California, and I had the privilege when I was working there to meet a lot of the tribal members, which was really cool. It was one of my highlights of working there. They gravitated towards me and they really liked me and they embraced me. And the guys were just really cool, and we would have, I've been bartending for a minute, so we would have these conversations all the time. Kind of off the record conversations when a bunch of customers went around. It was just a one-on-one kind of thing at the bar. And I'm so into this stuff. I'm so interested in other cultures and how other people have their ways of life. It's just fascinating to me. And if money was not an option, I would go everywhere and meet everybody I want to know, So I would ask them about what tribal life is all about. And I really wanted to know deep about their spirituality, because that fascinates me beyond par. Different people's spirituality, their spiritual practices. And so you're not really supposed to talk about race and religion and politics behind the bar. But when it was just a one-on-one with some of the tribal members and nobody was around, we would talk about race and we would talk about religion. And I would ask them about their spirits or their spiritual practices. And so this one guy, went in and he He was one of my favorites. Very to the point, like very like he had like a rebellious spirit, like he was a young guy, and he used to get, he used to get it in. He drank, he could hold his own. I'll put it that way. And he would be very honest, and he would be like, we are fucked up. And I would be like, yeah, man, you come to this bar all the time and come talk to me, and I see you drinking, your whiskey and whatnot. He was a tequila guy. And I'm like, dude, like, what's up? Like, why you drink so much? One-on-one, off the record, okay? I don't have these type of conversations with all of my guests, but we had that kind of rapport. So he was like, you know what? I'm going to be honest with you, okay? Like, we all get fucked up. He's like, because our lives have been fucked up. And he's like, some people may say I'm an alcoholic, but like, our whole tribe is alcoholics. Like, he's like, I gotta duck, sometimes when I'm going home on these reservations because these gunshots are going off. It's like worse than any ghetto that you can imagine. And I'm like, damn, you know what I mean? Like, I'm listening because, like, I've never heard the inside. I grew up in Connecticut, the suburb in Connecticut. So this is like, whoa, I'm getting like insider information of what these reservations are like. So he tells me, I'm like, well, how does it work? Because, I'm thinking about, because I've been, all right, shout out to Tariq Nasheed, but I've been talking about reparations for a very long time. I was a Black Studies minor. Big shout out to Dr. Tony King. And she told us the real deal. And when you find out the real deal about plantation life, about all of the things that we went through, you're like, you get pissed. Like, damn. How the fuck we don't have reparations? So I've been about reparations, and I wrote the song in 2010. Racist fucks afraid of us like black is contagious. They lock us in cages. They run us through mazes. Incarceration. And it was all about, I want my reparations. That's what the whole song was about. And this was a decade ago. I've been talking about reparations. So I'm thinking like, okay, wow, I have the opportunity in real time to talk to a Native American about how reparations really work. I want to know, how do you guys get paid? And he basically said that it was based off of their tribal affiliation. So it depended on the percentage of the tribe. And there are multiple tribes that they have. There's I can't remember all the names, but it was like certain things that you would hear, like stereotypical names, like the Blackfoots and things like that. So based off of their percentage of tribe. So let's say, like, for example, my father was 100% Blackfoot, but my mother was Caucasian or something. I would be getting 50% of access to whatever the number was. And so they have this whole system of who gets what and how they distribute it. And he said that based off of his tribal affiliation, he was getting like $8,000 a month. And so I'm like, how do you guys still live in teepees? Like, how are you still like on reservations living in this shitty life? And, you can't make something out of the money that you get, but from what I understand, it was kind of similar to the black community where the programming had been done. Like, he told me that white people hated the fact that they have to give them reparations. He was like, don't think that they just give, like the government just gives it to us. He's like, they want us all dead. Like, that's the reason why this is our culture, that we all are drunks. And I'm making a broad generalization. This didn't come from my mouth. This came from the conversation that I had with this Native American. He said there's a reason why our culture is full of drunks. And, he said, like, meth had hit, like, in SoCal, like, meth was, like, a big issue on the reservations, along with more, like, traditional tribal drugs. Pioski, I forget the name of it, some kind of Ioski or something like that. But he was like, they would getting high as a kite, and I'm like, you guys are getting, some of you guys are getting really good money. Like, how are you living like this? And he was just like, the damage has been done. And he's like, white people, they still, like, they really hate the fact that they have to give us this money. So he was on the low end of the spectrum getting $8,000 a month. There were people that were getting upwards of like $30,000 a month, just like good money. And then they also had stake within the casino. And you know, the casino is just house always wins. You know, that's just cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching all day. And that was a tribally owned casino. So I kind of learned, I won't say like I had the ins and the outs of how this whole reparation thing is broken down, but I had the opportunity to talk to them and find out like, okay, in real time, like this is how reparations are distributed. So I would imagine that when reparations are distributed to foundational Black Americans, that it might be, because there's so many blends of us. Some of us are half foundational Black American, some of us are half Caribbean, some of us have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you know, there's so much mixing that's gone on. How can we trace who is a foundational Black American? So there would need to be some sort of a process to find out how we can trace back to everybody, to find out who is a real descendant of slaves, and make sure that they get their fair share for the ancestors' free labor. And that's imperative. And to me, that's something that's been left out of the Black Lives Matter movement. That to me is like, that should be number one. Like if I was writing the bylaws of Black Lives Matter, the economic empowerment would be like for me, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying I tolerate disrespect, but who cares how people are treated so much if people aren't at other people's mercy? Like, financial empowerment allows people to not be at other people's mercy, not have to beg other people for a job. That's what's creating all of these hierarchies, not have to, you know, grow up in places where your kids are not adequately educated. If you have the, not just money, but I'm talking about assets, I'm talking about land, I'm talking about things that can be passed down, then it changes the dynamics entirely. And it allows for the people who have been traditionally oppressed to have a level of freedom, a level of access, a level of actual generational wealth. So these tangibles definitely should have been a part of the program for Black Lives Matter. Now, I go back to my culture, Liberia, and I would be curious as far as, because I hear Tariq Nasheed, shout out to Tariq Nasheed, talk about, you know, various cultures and how reparations need to go to foundational Black Americans. And I get it. Um, People look at it as divisive. I don't see it as divisive. I don't see it as divisive. When reparations were going to the Jews, do you think that they said, well, you know, the Irish had to have their potato famine, and this group has been underrepresented, and this group has been oppressed to some degree. Let's take all the money and let's divide it up against everybody who's been oppressed. They didn't do that. Nobody said, hey, well, you know, the Holocaust happened, but you know what? We had the Black Holocaust happen in America on this land. Like, the Jews didn't say, hey, we're going to take our pot and we're going to split it with the Black people to make sure that they're good. That didn't happen. The time that I spent in New York, when I was living in Brooklyn, I literally thought that I was in a dream the day that I walked a little bit too far and I'm on the other side of town, somewhere in Williamsburg. And I'm like, I could have sworn Brownsville was like right across the street. Why do I feel like I'm not even in America right now? Everything was in Yemen, Hebrew. I'm talking banks. I'm talking grocery stores. Everything Jewish owned. I'm like, whoa, I had never seen anything like this before in my life. And literally, you'll be in this town in Brooklyn, and you'll be like, whoa, like, no offense to the Jewish community, but it seemed almost like another world, the way that they've been able to preserve their culture to such a large extent. There was nobody around that looked like me. And all the women had wigs on. They all had these brown bob wigs, and most of them had like navy blue or like dark mid-shin length skirts and white blouses. All of them. None of them were rocking heels. They all were rocking flats. And the men were, they all, I believe most of them had facial hair. They might not all had facial hair, but they had curls, and they either had a yarmulke on or they had a like traditional like hat. I'm not sure what the official name of it. All of them, I didn't see them in denim. I all saw them dressed the same. It blew my mind. Like, I was like, holy shit, am I waking up from a dream? Because it was just so bizarre. Like in New York City. So when people talk about, well, why is it only Black lives? Isn't it all lives? Or, well, why do we need things that are specifically designated to Black people? Or, you sound like a segregationalist if you want to preserve your culture. Why is that same criticism not applied to the Jewish community? Because you can't. Because they have an economy that cannot be penetrated, in a culture that cannot be penetrated. They have their own money, they have their own banks. Period. Same with, like, New York is heavy with that, same with like Koreatown. Like, I've talked to Koreans who have told me, like, this is how we do things. This is how we have economic empowerment. Literally, we all pour our wealth into the newcomer's business. Like we have a system. It's not just like randomly, like that we're just like smarter than everybody. We have a system, a structure that we stick to that allows us to maintain economic empowerment. And like pretty much like if you don't stay on code, like you're out. So don't let people shame you into wanting tangibles, into wanting things that are specific for your community, because there's a lot of money. Okay, the US has a lot of money, but the money isn't infinite. So when I say that, I'll use this as an example. If I'm a mother, right, and I have one child and I have X amount of dollars, my money can go into that one child. Now, if I have 8 children, we got to cut back a little bit because each kid's got to eat, right? So if we're watering down tangibles for Black people and saying, well, we're going to include this group of people and that group of people and this group of people, and those group of people were oppressed too, well, now all of a sudden the pot is being divided a million ways. And that means less money for our children, less money for our schools, less money for the things that we need, period. So don't let anybody guilt you or shame you into thinking that you're a segregationist or that you are, racist for demanding very specific things for your community. Because a lot of times, even though, you may be around people who may, be like, yeah, we want to be the UN, we want it to be all shades and all these things, and and that's all well and good, but the thing is, their assets are protected. The same people that you hang with, their assets are protected. They've got dads, they've got people that they can call if they need these things, you know what I'm saying? We don't have those things. The Black community doesn't have those things. Those things were stolen from us. So that's my main point when it comes to Black Lives Matter. Now, it's very important also that in the brink of a changing or shifting, whatever we can call what's going on right now, because there's definitely some change unfolding right before our eyes. We have to be very careful, and we have to be very deliberate and very strategic within what we are demanding, and also how we want to carry that out. And I'll use this as an example. It's possible for people who are oppressed to become the oppressors. And we don't want to become oppressive, right? I'll use my family as an example. My mom's side is Liberian. And Liberia has a very distinct and unique history where basically, like you hear like, oh, go back to Africa. Well, the Liberians actually did. You know what I mean? They've been telling us to go back to Africa. Liberians actually said, yeah, you know what? We think we're going to go ahead and go back to Africa. So the Liberians went back to Africa, and after slavery, a lot of foundational Black Americans decided to stay and remain in America. But my people on my mom's side decided to go back to Africa, to a small continent on the West Coast. Now, formerly, Liberia was called the Grain Coast. It wasn't until the slaves went back that they called it Liberia. And Liberia was basically short for liberation, just like liberals are short for liberation. Liberia is short for liberation. And the reason that they renamed the country that was because of the slaves going back, right? The freed slaves going back. However, people lived there before it was Liberia. So when it was the Grain Coast, there were indigenous people that resided on that land. And the system that they had was very different. It was a lot more, I guess you could say, kind of close to like how you would imagine the traditional Native Americans living. It wasn't like formalized religion. It was more like tribal religions, and there were various tribes, and I guess just more like natural living, you could say. You know, I can go on for a while about how the traditional people of Liberia lived, but that's not what this whole video is about. This video is saying that, look, when it comes to a change or shift in power, if that's what we're looking at, we have to be very, very careful, because when the Americans went back and started Liberia, they did the basically exact same thing that white people were doing to Black people in America. So in Liberia, they set up the exact same system where if bartering was the economy prior to them getting there, they developed money, like cash money and like credit cards and things like that. And basically they set up a superiority system where your last name, if it was an American or like a white American last name, you were considered superior. And if you had an indigenous or more of like a traditional tribal last name, you were considered inferior. And basically almost set up slavery in Liberia, where the indigenous people were the cooks, where the indigenous people were like the farmers, like the farm workers, and like the Americo-Liberians were like the owners of the farm. And basically like replicated like a very foul system. And that hierarchy, if I can be, critical of my culture, I will say that that hierarchy is something that to me is just real foul. Even being a beneficiary of that hierarchy, because we were considered like we were like the Americo-Liberians. So even as a beneficiary of that hierarchy, I can look at it from an objective standpoint and say that that's really foul. Like basically the indigenous people did not have the same access to education. You know, my mother was able to go to school with the president's daughter, private school, and my grandmother, I'm sure, who probably, our legacy or our lineage, I'm sure some white man like raped somebody down the line because of my grandmother's features. She had like very blue eyes, and her features, her nose and her bone structure and things like that, it was not it wasn't traditional, right? So there was definitely white blood. There was definitely like a rape or some sort of a violation in our lineage, right? So for that to be a reason that people feel better is messed up. And my grandmother ended up marrying a guy from Switzerland. So my aunt is half Swiss and half Liberian. And just the way that the way everything went down, and the way that, you know, like she was treated based off of having like some sort of an affiliation with like a European, and like, you know, she was able to go travel the world and all of these things. This is white privilege. And although there weren't that many white people in Liberia, there was classism in Liberia. So there was not racism because it was a pretty much all black people, but there was classism in Liberia, which is messed up. So while we're on the brink of these things, right, and we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and there's this uproar in America, and there's all these racial riots, I bring up Liberia to say to black people, do not, because we've been oppressed for so long, if we have the opportunity to get access to wealth and to get access to power, do not become the oppressor. That's the opportunity to be able to create a whole new ethical system. And the whole new ethical system should exclude oppression. If we hate, right? If Black Lives Matter is about equality and is about oppression, then the new system, right? If let's say like there's this term new world order, if we have the opportunity to define the rules of a new world and create order for a new world, we should include a world that is not oppressive, right? Because we hate it so much. Because we've been the subject of it. We've been targeted so much in oppression in every way, oppressed in every way. So if we have the opportunity to create something new, we should eliminate what we hate, right? And that's applicable to, you know, the male and female dynamics, you know, the woman and man dynamics. Well, you know, at black men, you know how it feels to be oppressed. Don't oppress black women. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you know how it feels to be the underdog, don't create situations to make people the underdog. Black privilege. I addressed it in my IG, black privilege. You know, we have become brainwashed. And that's one thing I'll say. Like, I can talk for days about Liberia. And I didn't grow up in Liberia, but I have a very Liberian mother. I spent a few months in Liberia as a child. And I love our culture. I mean, I love our food. I love our music. I love how we dress, I love Liberia. So I can be equally as critical and say that certain things about my culture I don't love, you know? And when we talk about the women and male dynamic, that's kind of a part of our culture, you know, where we are raised as women to be kind of like more subservient to men, you know? So we'll talk, that's a whole nother video. But when we talk about black privilege, we talk about white privilege and black privilege, and you hear these buzzwords, white supremacy, but there's black privilege as well. And that's the fact that our skin does agree with the sun, and there's so many benefits. Google it, the benefits to melanin. There's so many benefits to being melanated. I'm going to continue this. It's not always going to be about black issues, social issues. I'm going to continue these conversations. My love and my passion is my music, so it's going to be a lot about music. But that's my take on BLM, Black Lives Matter. And big shout out to Tariq Nasheed. Big shout out to Tariq Nasheed for a specific reason. This man, from what I understand, I don't know him, but from what I understand, the reason I have such admiration for his career is because Tariq Nasheed he found funding for his very first project, Hidden Colors 1, and produced and wrote his own film. And the film was extremely poignant and like had a lot of information that black people really needed to understand and really needed to hear. And then he went on and he bankrolled himself Hidden Colors 2, and then Hidden Colors 3, and Hidden Colors 4, and Hidden Colors 5. So when you are independently wealthy because of your own effort and your own creativity and you masterminding your own path, it's a lot more difficult to be controlled. Like a lot of people I know would want to speak freely and wish that they could speak freely, but they're being backed by somebody. So like literally they kind of have to be like a puppet to their puppet master, because their puppet master controls the money. Whereas Tariq Nasheed, he can talk all the shit that he wants, and he doesn't have to speak in fear. He can speak fearlessly. Why? Because he's independently wealthy from his own art, his own projects, his own creativity. And I really like that. I really appreciate that. That's really, if I could dream up my life, it would definitely be a life where I would be able to be as free as that. So big shout out to Tariq Nasheed and his fight for Black Americans doing what's right and reparations. And until next time, everybody, peace.